And before we really get started, please thank Paul and his crew for running the show. They do this for love of the PHP community. Saying thank you to them doesn't pay them for all the sleepless nights, all the long hours, all the phone calls, all the postage, all the shipping, all the other stuff. But just saying thank you does show that you appreciate the work they're doing. So please make sure you thank him and the other volunteers. Oh, you'll love this. A big thank you to the audio engineer for letting me get away with that little bit of fluff. Well, for those of you who were here last year, I'm sorry I don't have any more new jokes, so you have to suffer the old ones again. I am Dave Stokes. I'm a MySQL community manager. I've been doing that for 7 going on 8 years now. I go around evangelizing on MySQL products. I'm also your lightning rod back to management, so if we ever do anything to upset you or you have questions about, contact me. I can get it to upper management really quickly. Oracle Legal wants me to tell you that anything I mention that's not an official, generally available product with a price on it, take what I say with a grain of salt. One of the reasons I love coming to Scotland, this is my 2nd trip this year, is things are a lot different here than the States. I found this sign yesterday while wandering around and thought it was very interesting. Compare this to something you'd see in the States. And you see why I love it over here. So MySQL is 22, going on 23 years old. Oracle's owned it for 7, almost 8 years. And in that time, we've done a lot of good. Now, MySQL 5.7 was our best reviewed version of software. More people have upgraded from older versions to get to MySQL 5.7, mainly for the JSON data type than anything else. It's better performance, and you can actually do a lot more safe processing of your data. Now, something else we're doing with the document store and group encryption is we're doing features as plugins. Rather than have to wait till the next release, you can just plug in this new feature where you go. Usually it's just installing a shared object, and you get the latest features. You don't have to wait till the next release. Also, we're hiring. So if you're interested in that, see me a little bit later. So MySQL 8, when I mentioned that we're going from 5.7 to 8, the first question most people get is, what happened to 6? What happened to 7? Well, we did have a version 6 back in the pre-Sun days. And all the good features were backported into previous versions, kind of like PHP 6. Anyone here run PHP 6? Not in production, I hope. Also, the cluster product has been using the 7 line for quite a long time. So we decided, with the new features you're going to see in a little bit, that we really, really wanted to jump to a new number. Well, GA's been around for 5.7's been around for October 2015. And as I mentioned, we did have a 6 in the pre-Sun days. First big feature, a true data dictionary. Well, before this, if you open up a version of MySQL and you went under user-lib MySQL, you saw a whole bunch of .myi, myds, frm files. That was the metadata about your tables in files. That ties you very directly to the inode system. And if the wrong person hits your tables at the right time, they delete the wrong file, you're up the creek without a paddle. And we learned from replication that if we put the information about replication in the database and something goes wrong, the database knows how to rebuild it. So now we're putting all the information into the database, and it's actually a data dictionary. Even the system tables are going to be transactional. Up till now, everything's been MyISAM. Now, the good news is you can now have millions of tables within a database. The bad news is you can now have millions of tables within a database. Some of the older folks are laughing. You'll remember 15, 20 years ago, we were told all you ever need for programming is 640K worth of memory. So I know right now that people are thinking millions of tables in a database, I'll never use that. I'm just waiting for the first bug thing that says, why can't I have billions of tables? CTEs and windowing functions. If you have a background in another database, you might be using common table expressions and windowing functions. MySQL hasn't had them to now. Very handy. In the past with MySQL, especially if you were writing subqueries, the code got kind of weird looking. So not exactly handy to not have them, but if you grew up with MySQL, you're not used to seeing them. Now, windowing functions are great for iterating over a bunch of, well, a subset of data. You'll see some examples in a minute. The key word where the windowing function is over. Here we're searching over a partition. We're partitioning by department ID. So in this example, we want to know for every department the salary and the sum of the salary for that department. Another example, here we're doing a range. We're going over interval between 1 week preceding and the current date, and being able to go through the data. So if you need to do week by week analysis since the beginning of the calendar year, you can run a function like this to get information about sales data. Now, common table expressions, the keyword is with. So we create a query and then select from that. And here's an example where we're creating a query called QN. We're selecting column T1 from a table, and then we're selecting everything from that. Oversimplified example. But we also have recursive CTEs where things can get much more crazy and in quick fashion. So here's an example where we're selecting 1, and then we're counting up to 10 with a union for a second query. Optimizer and parser. This is the heart of the database. First thing we're giving you is true descending indexes. In the past, we lied. If we asked for a descending index, we basically gave you an increasing index instead of a decreasing index, and then lied about it the way it worked. Also, the optimizer trace output gives you a lot more information about file sorts. File sorts can be very expensive, and in the past, we didn't quite give you right information. This time, we're giving you such things as the keys and the sizes of the various fields that have to go on. You also have optimizer hints, where if you know a certain index works better than another, you can tell the optimizer, don't check out this other index, go straight to this one, and please use that. MySQL uses 1 index per join. So if you know a certain index is better than another, cut out that, it goes a lot faster. We also have more variables under the sys schema to give you information on what's going on. One of the more interesting ones is that if you're working on a set of data and someone in transactions working on the same set of data and they start doing deletes, the optimizer used to go, where they're deleting has to be the good set of data. I'll start doing all my calculations off that, which was great for the other person, but not for you. So if you work in an environment where you're doing lots of transactions and someone else is playing what-if games with the data, this will help you a lot. Also, we're giving you NOWAIT and skip lock. This will probably be the biggest thing for most of you out there. What they do is skip lock is when you do your transaction. Here we do a select star from seats where seat number between 2 and 3 and booked equals no. If a record that we want is locked, it skips past that. So you can go out and find out what else is available. Also, for NOWAIT, if you're trying to do something similar to that first transaction and you run into someone who's locked the data, you can skip that right away and return to your application and say, I didn't find any records right there available right now. We can go on. Roles. For those of you who've been around MySQL for a long time, you know setting up accounts can be a big typing mess. Update user set select underscore priv equals single quote uppercase Y, single quote comma, delete underscore priv equals single quote, equals single quote uppercase Y, Gets real messy. And especially if you have multiple people working on the same function or the same project, you're trying to copy over someone's permissions to another account, doesn't always quite go. So now you can set up roles. So if you have a programmer who's working on accounts payable, you set up the account payable programmer role, and every new programmer you get who works on that project, you assign them that role. Makes it a lot easier rather than just higgledy-piggledy handing out privileges. Character sets. MySQL 8 will truly be all UTF-MB4. Part of that's our work with JSON. Other parts you'll see in just a second. Now, in the past, if you used MySQL and you asked for UTF-8-MB4, you actually got UTF-8-MB3. Subtle difference. Now, part of this is, in the past, we've had character sets and collations. So you could have collations that were case insensitive or case sensitive. Now you're going to have collations that are accent sensitive and accent insensitive. So that's a big change that will hit some of you. Now, that should say 3 bytes instead of 3 bytes. With 3 bytes UTF-8 MB4 or MB3, you didn't get emojis. And you also didn't get the supplemental plain support. But with MySQL 8, you're going to get that. If you're doing stuff in Chinese, Japanese, or Korean, you get the full unified ideographs. And as far as I know, MySQL is the only major database out there still offering the GB 18030 character set, which is mandated by a lot of contracts from China. Now, for those of you running Latin 1, not so much over here, but a big problem in the States, you're going to be going from 1 byte per character up to 4 bytes per character. So your data sets might be chewing up more disk space. Now, one of the big reasons we're doing that is this. As you know, everyone somewhere wants the poop emoji in their database. And now you're able to give it to your users. Invisible indexes. How many of here run explain on queries on a regular basis? Okay, for those of you who don't know what that is, you prepend an SQL statement with the word explain, and the optimizer will report back what it's trying to do to run that query. It needs to build a data plan to pull that data back the most efficient way possible. Now, part of that is you want your indexes, where possible, to use indexes to go right to the records they want. Well, sometimes there's multiple indexes out there, and you're not sure one of them is good. Well, what if you can make one of them disappear? And then you run your explain on there and double check the query plan. Well, in the past, MySQL didn't have this. So what you do is you'd blow away that index and realize, yeah, I need that. And go to rebuild that index, and it might take minutes, hours, a weekend, a week. It's kind of messy. But now you can just say, alter index invisible, and boom, the optimizer can't see it for your session only. Other people running aren't affected. We also have a new feature called SET PERSIST. For those of you running in the cloud or running in shops where you have multiple people administrating the servers, you know that Joe makes one change, Jennifer makes another change, the system goes down, no one remembers what they did because they're off on vacation, they're off on holiday, and you can't remember what they changed, but the system isn't running right. Well, with SET PERSIST, every time you make a change to one of the major global variables, it's written off to a file, and it's also recorded in your logs with a timestamp and the user who did that. Here's an example where you're changing the buffer pool size to 512 times 1024 times 1024. In shops where you have one DBA, this isn't a big change, but if you have multiple people who are admitting the box, this will be a blessing to you. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to make the new features available to you faster. We're trying to make things more pluggable. I'm doing a lot of time talking with various vendors who want to write storage engines and other features for MySQL. We're trying to improve the low-level documentation so people can come up with an idea and we can get to market. 3G geometry. In the past, I had lots of friends who had to run PostGIS, even though they're a MySQL shop, because we didn't do 3D geometry. Well, with 5.6 and 5.7, we started supporting the Boost.geometry project and getting a hold of their software. Big change for us, and with 5.7, it was two-dimensional. With MySQL 8, it's going to be 3D, so you can have a flat world or an ellipsoidal world, depending on what your needs. Your coordinate systems will wrap around, so if you're working on, is it a faster go counterclockwise or clockwise around system to get there, you actually have that. And you'll find out that those of you who are really doing this, that this is a big step forward for us. Now, as I mentioned earlier, JSON has been very, very popular for us, and we're adding new operators. If you think of another operator, let me know, and I'll get to the developers. These three statements that you see here are equivalent. If you want to, you can just abbreviate JSON unquote and JSON extract as a dash and two arrows. Makes it a little bit easier to type and see when formatting. We also have a JSON pretty function. I don't know how many of you play with heavily embedded JSON documents, but if you're looking at it on the MySQL command line or you're running a CLI PHP program and it spits it out, it can get rather messy to try to figure out what's embedded where. And this is a very simple example. I need a much more complex one. But we do have a pretty function. We also have functions to allow you to take data that, here we're taking arrays and we're aggregating them. So you turn one array into multiple arrays. And we also have something similar for objects. We also have functions to tell you how much space your JSON document's taking up. You get about a gigabyte. It's controlled by the max packet size in the MySQL protocol. By the way, I'll talk about the new MySQL protocol in just a little bit. So if you're changing things, you can see how much size you're actually taking up. And if you're deleting stuff, you can see how much the delta is with your tables. We also have a JSON table function that you now test at labs.mysql.com. This is where we put out test versions of stuff that we didn't think were ready for the release candidate. So what's JSON table do? Well, it lets you take JSON information and format it like a regular SQL column. Here we're taking a JSON document and we're saying, well, we're going to have a column for first name, last name, and contact, and we specify what the data should look like and where to get it from. And then from there, you can do a where clause to pare that down further. So you can do group bys, wheres, do range searches, and all the other stuff. This is going to be very handy. Now, it's a little clunky when you start playing with it because you're taking unformatted data and formatting it and then doing all this funky stuff on it. Old timers will say, well, you wouldn't have to do this if you normalized your data properly. Well, today, you're often programming before you really know what the data looks like. And sometimes you're feeding another system that's going to need formatted data. This is a way to get it. So, for MySQL 8, if you want, if you can, go out and download it today. If you're in the Docker images, we support Docker images. Please give it a try. If you're looking for a lot of details on what's going on behind the scenes, the unofficial MySQLguide.com gives you a lot more detail than I can go in here in a simple 40-minute talk. And woo, that's a lot of the stuff going on with MySQL 8. Now, some other stuff that I want to mention to you is group replication. For those of you who need active master replication, this is yet another plugin. We hope it's going to be the Galera killer out there. Right now, you can run up to 7 or 8 masters at the same time. So if you need to add in another master, it joins the group. It gets brought up to date with all the information. The way commits work is you send your query with an update or an insert to the pool of masters, most likely through a proxy, MySQL router, proxy SQL, something like that. One of the masters will grab that update and tell all the other masters out there, we are going to update this record. Go. Now, if a master can't do that or won't do that, it will fall out of the replication group. Now, this is a little bit of extra overhead than rather having just one master for writes, but for those of you who need redundancy, this is the way to go. Also, we have the MySQL document store. For those of you who really hate embedding SQL strings in your PHP code, this is a way around that. It's based on a new protocol we have. Part of the new protocol is set up to do administrative functions like the NODB cluster work. It's also going to let you do asynchronous calls to databases. So if you have 4 or 5 queries you have to do every time you open up a new application for a customer, you can send out those queries and wait for them to come back asynchronously. Now, the document store was designed kind of like Mongo, where you're just doing CRUD stuff on collections of JSON documents. The good news here is that you can get NoSQL access to data or SQL access to the same data. Now, if you go through the document store, it's listening on port 33060. Traditional MySQL protocol listens on 3306. If you're using the document store, it gives you the ability to, I'll show it off in just a second. And the sales engineers asked me to put this in for the slide group. If you want to go out and actually buy support for MySQL, it starts at $5,000, which is kind of a useless figure over here. And with that, you get the firewall, encryption, authentication, audit, thread pool, backup, and support. The encryption uses the Oracle Key Vault, which is the industry standard for this sort of thing. So if you need to have your data encrypted at rest, let me point you to some folks to talk to. Also, if you go on to the MySQL Oracle Cloud, or the Oracle Cloud for MySQL, they guarantee 50% less cost than AWS. You get the full enterprise edition of MySQL. You get full control of the server rather than being locked out of the admin function, so you can actually change things that you need. And here's the names of the sales team if you want to talk to them. Let me give you a quick demo. Oops. By the way, my dog hates that picture. She thinks she looks horrible in glasses. Remind me later. So part of the new protocol is we had to come up with a new shell. And one of the great things about starting over again with a new protocol is you can do things a little bit differently. Now, instead of calling MySQL to invoke the shell, you just type MySQL sh. And what's nice about it, it's a little bit more visibly appealing. So, let's connect to the WorldX database. And this is using the document store. Since I'm talking to the WorldX database, it has created an object for me to use called DB. And that DB, thankfully, points to the world_x database. Now, if I wonder what collections we have out there, it tells me we have one collection called country info. And if I want to find a particular record, and I know what the key is, it gives me the information back as a JSON document. Now, programmatically, if you hate embedding JSON or SQL code in your pretty PHP code, or Python code, or C++, or Java, or Node.js, or JavaScript, much easier way to actually get information, much more consistent, and you don't have that ugly select stuff running through your code. Something that's also interesting about the new shell, now we switch to SQL mode. By the way, this shell has a Python mode, an SQL mode, and a JavaScript mode. Yep. Select star from, it will let me do command completion. Here's a case where it has a whole bunch of possibilities that I don't want. But so like I get to SEL, it knows I want select from So for those of you who are like me in the SQL world, this is a godsend because you don't have to sit there and flip through the manual and try to figure out what option is out there. It's a little bit more visually appealing. You can change the prompt around for various things. And as you can see, there's reporting that's talking to localhost at port 33060. So if you got a chance, please give this a try. If you're a traditional CLI MySQL person, you might find this a little handier. Also, one thing to notice is that if I'm talking to a MySQL 8 instance on this Ubuntu box, the one thing to notice is that it is using a cipher. It is using TLS to talk to the server. We're going to force you to use TLS. Right now, your businesses are talking everything but security, but they're buying security. They might be talking agility. They might be talking cloud. They are buying both, but the one thing they're really putting their money in right now is security. So if you don't have certificates of your own, the server will create them for you. Let's see what else. And that basically is the highlights. I want to leave a lot of time for Q&A. Let me put this back up here for those who want to get the LinkedIn or joined in or all that. So with that, do we have any questions? I know I'm right before lunch, but someone has to have a question. Oh, yes, sir.
What sort of timeline are you looking at for releasing?
Officially, the official Oracle line is, I can tell you, sometime hopefully in the next calendar year. Unofficially, we tend to make announcements. So if Larry Ellison sees you guys, you've never heard that from me. Yes, sir.
So you made reference to the document store. Mm-hmm. Is this the first step towards having one homogeneous database that covers both relational and NoSQL structures on a single machine maybe, or is this just enabling people to use the same product for any kind of data storage purpose?
Ideally, both. The great thing is if you don't know SQL, but you need a powerful database, this gives you access to that. Now, you may need that, but the guy in the cubicle next to you is an SQL expert or part-time DBA, and they want the same data through SQL. They can get it at the same time. So if you have a development staff, like most programmers coming out of college these days and universities aren't taught SQL, and you don't want them running horrendous queries, stick them here until they get their feet wet with queries. Meanwhile, you can actually do both. You can actually go out and get information from a document collection or from a traditional SQL library or data set or table using the document store. It's a little bit funky, but it works very well. So
Does that cause trouble when you're optimizing? Because your settings for one might affect the other?
It shouldn't. The back end is all traditional MySQL, SQL going on behind the scene. But the developer who doesn't know SQL, they don't know that. All they know is they're doing CRUD work. And they don't actually know that their create is actually an insert, or they don't know their update is an update. They might figure out the delete's a delete, but the replace they're not going to figure out as an update. So, thank you. And if you want to play with it later, I can let you all play with it.
I think you referred to the sort of document one as schema flexible. So, you know, like MongoDB or something.
Yeah, you basically have a gigabyte of JSON information.
Okay, so is this a field that goes on every table? You're accessing the same data, so is it a new field gets added to the table, or it's not going to run an alter, you know, if someone just puts a new field in there?
Let me show you the dirty secret. When you create a collection, it's going to be a new table with that collection name. So it's the equivalent is create table. And what we do is we have a JSON column called doc for document. We really go all out for our names for things like this. And we create a table, a column called _ID. Now this can be a number you provide, or in some cases we can make it up for you. And that ID is actually extracted from the document. If you have an _ID in there, it will actually pull that out there. Now, if you have other information out there that you want to store, like an email address or an age or a Twitter handle or something like that, you can do another generated column like we did for _ID and have that out there. And you can index that column for fast searches. And within the document store, you could also have indexes if you want. So we're trying to give you the ultimate flexibility so that you can go this way with all JSON documents, or you can go the SQL way with JSON documents.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you. Well, if you're shy, please come up and see me later. The only dumb question is the one you take home with you. And I hope it's a great lunch. I know Paul probably will assure us it's a great lunch. And thank you all for coming out. If you have other questions, please see me.
Thank you, Dave.